Welcome everybody to this week's episode of the Bombercast. I am your host, Sponsor 34, alongside the Grizz as always. How are you, Grizz?
I'm doing well. Refreshed off a week off of watching footy, which is nice. Probably not as refreshed as the players, but looking forward to this week.
And tonight on our Bombercast, we do have a very special guest. Now, this man has played 243 games for the Essendon Football Club. He won the Crichton Medal in 1993, which was, of course, a premiership year. He won the Michael Tuck Medal in 1994. He was captain in 1996 and 97, as assistant coach between 2005 and 2010, and actually was senior coach for a game in 2006 there as well against Carlton. Now, I think everybody listening probably knows who I'm talking about by now, but if you don't, we do have Gary O'Donnell with us this evening. So welcome to the Bombercast, Gary.
Pleasure to be here, gentlemen, and thanks for the invite. Hopefully it gets good stuff out of me, but if you don't, you can just delete it. It's okay.
Well, we're very excited to have you, Gary. I think you're certainly the favourite guest we've had so far for me. That's
Let's just say that to all players.
We try not to. Gary, thanks for jumping on. We wanted to touch on a whole sort of range of things today. And I suppose, we'll obviously start from the start, which is your playing career. But before Essendon, you came from what seemed to be a pretty fertile recruiting ground for Essendon, which is the Ringwood area. You played for North Ringwood as a junior alongside Fish. So taking us back to before the AFL, obviously a few Essendon players came from that area. What were your memories of playing junior footy? Do you have any sort of fond memories?
Well, I love the game of footy. There was a long history of people in my family playing. There's 4 generations, actually 5 now, because a girl called Georgie Rankin and my niece also, Jasmine Fleming, plays for Hawthorn. So if you count the women, which we do in our family, you've got 5 generations. So always grew up on footy. My dad got to see him play local footy. He played AFL or VFL in those days, 8 games long, 15 at North, but he played till he was 40 in local comps. So I was able to follow him up the mountain. Actually, Linda, he played at 40 years old in 1978. So that was good. My earliest memories playing myself. Dad never let me play till I was 10. It was under 13 was the lowest or the youngest age you could play, and he wouldn't let me play till I was 10. And when finally got a game, play every second week. Probably the big white shorts were too big for me. Wore the old Jenkins boots. I don't know if any people remember them. They were high cut above the ankle, and Dad said, no, they protect your ankle. You're going to wear them most of your career as a kid if I'm in control of you. But the local grounds in those days, really muddy. I'd come off one day and just drop the boots in front of him at his feet. I was actually tearing up. Said, I'm never wearing these again. I want low-cut boots like every other kid. And I got my wish and got low-cut boots that week. I long sleeve for a couple of years. I wasn't a real footballer until I got short sleeves. So I think it was in my 3rd year. I was able to get a short sleeve Guernsey, and I was a real footballer. So under 13, played with Paul Salmon in the local comp, North Ringwood. We won a couple of flags as kids. We also had Peter Banfield play with us, and he played with Essendon in that area. Both him and Fish were out at Essendon earlier than me. They were a little bit more developed. He played a couple of years with us, couldn't quite get a game in those strong teams and moved to Brisbane. So they're my first memories of footy in the East. As you said, a very fertile ground or area for Essendon, both that, the Essendon area and the Horsham or the Wimmera district in the country in the far west of Victoria. That was a really good area in the days of zones rather than the draft.
Paul Vanderhaar was from Ringwood, I think, not North Ringwood, but from Ringwood. And then I think Kevin Walsh and Dean Bailey both come from North Ringwood as well. So we tend to pick our players from there. But sorry, Bonds.
Walsh, a couple of years older than me. Dean Bailey, a couple of years younger. You also had, Vander was Ringwood, had Nobby Clark at Ringwood.
Yep.
Earlier than that, Robin Close at Ringwood. You had Daisy Williams come from Vermont. So you had quite a good, strong list of players coming from the east to supplement the Essendon area and the Wimmera district.
And it was definitely a strong time for the Essendon Football Club as we saw through sort of that mid-90s, or mid-80s, sorry, and early 90s period. And you did sort of say that you weren't probably as developed as someone like Fish. And so your career in VFL level started off in the twos, and you played over 50 games, was it, before you actually managed to debut for the senior side? Do you think maybe that's something nowadays that the league's missing a little bit? So we don't really have that standalone two side for the comp now. So, I mean, a young player these days, it'd be very rare to see them play 50 VFL games before being able to step up into the seniors.
Yeah, they've been moved on by then, haven't they? I think just different players, different people take different amounts of times to make it. Some are really prepared when they get to a club. You know, young Horn Francis, he was in a 3-year-old body, he was going to play straight away, and at North Melbourne in their situation.
Yeah.
But yeah, look, maybe I wasn't ready. I just needed that time. I think I was fortunate to come through in those days because the reserves competitions were pretty strong as well. You had a lot of men playing football in the lower level and in the reserves, either coming back from injury or just the lists were a little bit older, perhaps. You had guys out of form. So I get to play on, VFL standard blokes playing in the seconds, and that helped develop me as well. It took actually 67 games of reserves before I got a game. But after that, albeit I thought I could get probably a year earlier, I should have got a game or could have got a game, not should. You're not entitled to anything in sport, but once I got that game, I knew I was ready and I was fully equipped to have some sort of career if I was good enough. I'd been working on a lot of things. Sheeds came to me and said, all these times, I don't think you don't put the ball quite well enough on your right foot, Gary. Well, yeah, okay, you go and work on that, but I reckon I have 1 in 10 kick on my right side. So a coach is just trying to, keep you with a message, I suppose, and string you along. But yeah, look, they must have seen something in me as well to keep me there. If you count the under-19 year, it's 4 years, the end of the fourth year before I get a game. So they saw something in me, but really they had to be patient. But yeah, there's plenty of blokes that can come straight into senior footy as an 18-year-old and have an impact as well.
Do you think reserves footy was more a part of a footballer's life cycle back in the 80s and the 90s? Because I think you're right. So players either are moved on or seek to be moved on really nowadays if they're in the reserves for longer than 2-3 seasons at a time. The Carlton game talked about how he'd played a lot of reserves football with guys like Jordan Ridley and Jane Laverty and these sorts of players, and it actually helped them when they stepped into seniors. Do you think there's something sort of missing from that in today's day and age, or do you think development's come such a long way at the AFL level that you can circumvent that?
There's a lot more time for development. They're time players. They've got development coaches. I think it was, Sheeds, who was the only full-time bloke, and you might add a couple of part-time assistants. So you're relying on that those limited resources and probably senior players that are helping you through as well. When Mason says, I was in the reserves for a while, well, he was hardly that compared to the blokes in my day. But there was less pressure on us when we came through. There was only our family that was getting frustrated. My father was. He was saying, Gary, you just don't run like you used to. Before I broke my leg at 17 and missed 18 months before I played in the under-19s. You just don't run like you used to. You're not doing this, not doing that. So it was really only family, maybe friends that take an interest, that had any interest in you. Whereas these days you've got, the advent of social media, and you've got a lot of pressure, a lot of spotlight on every individual player on a list. And it's much different coming through. And supporters and people that follow the club put a lot of pressure on the club to make decisions on players, either they're not good enough, move them on, or to start playing them in the seniors to have a look at them. And a lot more pressure these days. And it's going to be a rare situation where you have, the apprenticeships that some of us had in the past.
I think you and I can definitely agree. There's a lot of pressure on the players in social media these days. How do you think you would have gone, Gary? Do you think you would have thrived in this sort of environment, or you're pretty happy that you skipped this sort of era?
At times you think, oh, geez, it's a little bit over the top. But no, I think I would have thrived just to be able to prepare professionally 24/7. And also, I prided myself on my preparation and was fairly consistent. So, I wasn't a bad player, but I wasn't one of the stars. But my lows weren't low, and my highs weren't as some of the champion players that have played. So I would have loved this situation because I reckon I would have been able to have a really good, strong, solid career and probably get more out of myself being able to be, fully concentrating on it solely.
We would probably argue you had a decent career, regardless. Gary.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think
when I've had a couple of drinks, I say I've played 43 good games, 200 great ones.
Yeah.
Seriously, yeah. Look, proud of the career, but more proud of the consistency. I reckon. Just I didn't really have too many really poor games. Okay, there were room for improvement games, but what you normally wanted from Gary O'Donnell, you normally got it as close as you could. So that was what I prided myself on.
You did win the best and fairest in '93 as Bonton, but I think you had 6 straight years in the top 3 of the best and fairest, which probably goes more to what you're saying in that you were a consistently good player, a very sort of tough player. We appreciate that. We just want to talk about your best footy. So when did you think, obviously you won the best and fairest in '93, and that was a great year for the club in what was sort of a premiership out of nowhere for the Bombers, which we'll take any day of the week. But your footy career, when you look back, when and what do you think your best football was? Do you think it was that '93 year, or do you think that was just the top the votes?
No, '93 was my best year, but there was a few that were close. I didn't mind '95 either. I thought that was fairly strong. And actually 1990 as well, 1993, 95. But yeah, I think just you're not thinking that. You're probably looking back on the career, you can make those sort of judgments. But, I was 28 years old in 1993. You're at the footy club for 10 years. Your output should be at your best, I would have thought, because you slightly go downhill after the 30s, or you don't get any better, I suppose. Some do, but most don't. So 28, the prime time, and it was my sweet spot, and it was my favourite year. My favourite 15 minutes of footy that year was the last 15 minutes of the grand final. We knew we were hit the first couple about 10-minute mark where we're 10 goals up, and I just parked myself behind the ball, looked at players in the eye, knowing that the grins, knowing that we'd got the game. Looking at people in the stands, it was a fabulous 15 minutes of my life.
I mean, 1990, that grand final, I'm not sure if people are aware, but you actually had the most disposals on the ground alongside Michael Long. The difference, of course, he kicked 2 goals and you kicked 2 points. So if you kicked 2 goals, maybe the Norm Smith medal voting would have gone a different way. But I do have to ask, it's a question that we got put to us. His goal on the line there, did Silvani get anywhere near it? Or because you would have had the perfect view being on the ground, you would have been able to see it clear as day. So
yeah. It went through his hands. It almost took 2 fingers off. So that let's not debate it. But I think isn't it recently the 1979 Wayne Harms?
Yes.
One been proven to be in. So I'm sure in the future the Michael Long Silvani touched goal will be proven to be a goal at some point in the future as well. We can continue to say it probably was touched the way Sauce carried on about it. Didn't he carry on?
He did. And I'll be honest, I've always had a bit of a laugh watching the game back because the commentators say, oh, yeah, no, it was definitely touched. And I watched the footage going, We have goal review now with better cameras, and you can't tell that stuff. How the hell can they were very quick to jump on it in '93? Yeah,
well, the ways arced up probably, but who knows? Just the run, the agility, the speed, just it deserved a goal, and probably the 3 weeks he played before that, he kicked a couple like that just lit us up and carried us over the line in that final series.
So can we just talk generally about 1993? Because it was a strange year in AFL balances. It was a quite even year. Like the Box came up sort of not out of nowhere, but probably weren't expected to be premiership fancies in that year. But Essendon and Carlton finished on top. It was a very sort of even year across the board. Going into 1993, did you get the feeling that you thought you were a chance, or did you think you might be a finals aspirations because you still had a loaded team. Like it was you still had, James Hird was obviously there, young Timmy Watson, a bunch of really from the 80s were still in that team as well. Did you ever get the feeling going into the year that what you did in 1993 was possible?
Any Kevin Sheedy coach team that I was involved in the pre-season thought we had a chance at the end of the year. If things went right, we got the environment right, we got a bit of luck, we were always a chance. That was the nature that Sheeds instilled in us. So 93 was no different. We've won 1.5 games out of the first 5 of that season. So after that, you're thinking, geez, this could be a long year. But yeah, as you said, we still had, the likes of, Bomber, Halves, Fish from the early 80s or mid 80s premierships. You had a other, group of mid-range blokes, myself, Buick. Although when you say mid-range, I was as old as Halves and Salmon. But Chrissy Danaher, Dave Grenvold, those types, and Longy. And then, little did we know that the 7 or 8 young kids that got introduced into the team, the previous year, some in that year and then some the previous year, that played in a reserves premiership with Simon Madden and Terry Danaher as well the year before. So that was a good experience for them. But little did we know that probably 4 or 5, even 5 of them might be in the AFL Hall of Fame. Some are already in it, but might be inducted into the AFL Hall of Fame in future.
Yeah.
And it just all sort of come together. And they were young kids that didn't know how to lose, just kept trying all the time. They were easy to coach. It was only a simple set of team rules that we had. There was 10 actually that we had to adhere to, and they were like plasticine, really malleable, and we're all able to come together. It was as you said, it was a tight year. I think we had a bye the last round. The second last round we played Geelong. They beat us by 3 or 4 goals. We lost about 5 blokes through injury. Yeah. And we were on top, but we needed results to go our way in that last round. It was only a 20-game season, so things had to happen. I think Carlton got done, and we needed Bulldogs or North not to beat Bulldogs by too much, and and we end up just, I think it was 1 game or 1.5 games was the difference between first and sixth. In the final 6. So anything could have happened. It was really close, but we finished on top. So I believe that we didn't pinch a premiership. I think we deserved it. We just played. We were the best team in the last 3 weeks of the year as well, and got the money.
Yeah, I think it was 2 wins the difference between first and ninth. Like it was significantly quite log jammed in. You're right. It went so far. Yeah, and it's the sort of thing the AFL would dream of that in the modern day, wouldn't it? If there were 2 games between 1 and 9, it probably isn't possible with a 23-game season and with the way sort of the draft and the salary cap works. But it's just an incredible year looking back.
Who knows? They might be able to luck it again and get that, but you never know. And even this year, our blokes just motoring along nicely. You never know what's going to happen in a season of footy. You just some teams that are touted, they get a few injuries. You have a purple patch. You finish a little bit higher than you thought you would. You maybe even see. We may not make the finals this year, but we may also finish 4th. Who knows? It just just depends on how results go and how luck goes.
Yep.
And you never know. You can give it a crack in any given year.
I'll just move along a little bit in the 90s. And obviously, you took over the captaincy in 96 and 97. Did that change your approach to how you played? And also, I just want to quickly ask, 96, do you ever look back at that one as that being one that maybe got away? Because, Longy did his knee against Geelong in the Heritage game. Lloydie went down early in the prelim against Sydney, which you lost by a point. There's no guarantee you would have beaten North the following week, but you don't lose to them by 2 goals during the year. So do you look back and go, what if with that year as well, maybe?
was really disappointing. Yes, you mentioned I was the captain, and maybe did it change you? I'm not. I don't think it did. It might have, but I don't think it did. I think I still tried to go about around the club the same way as I did. I think your skipper has to be impeccable in the area of what your team wants to do, the rules, the way it plays, the way it conducts itself. The captain and its couple of leaders have to be impeccable in that area so that players can't say, oh, he's not doing it, I don't have to do it. So that was how I approached my leadership and captaincy. It was a really disappointing year. It was the 100th anniversary of the VFL, I suppose, 1897 to 1996. It was a gold cup. The Premiership Cup was gold. All the medallions were gold. It was something that, geez, it would have been good to win. Yes, we had a bit of bad luck. There was 4 or 5 others in that preliminary final that got injured by the end of the game. Whether some of them would have come up, I think Mark McCurry missed, and he might have been coming back for the following week. But what I can say was North Melbourne were the raging hot favourites that year. But once you make a grand final, anything can happen. We've seen it a lot. It's just what happens on the day. So you have just given yourself every chance to win one by qualifying, and that was the biggest disappointment, not being able to get over Sydney, especially being 2 goals up with about 2.5 to play. We just couldn't get a hold of the footy and hold it up. I think we were best around that time in footy. We were about the best team at counting down the clock and being able to hold the ball, keep the ball, pass short, manipulate the opposition. And we just we couldn't get one mark that allowed us to do that in that last 2.5 minutes. And that was the really disappointing part.
There's something about losing to Sydney in heartbreaking circumstances up in Sydney that Essendon just happens to do. Like even one day, you think of Gary Rowan kicking the goal after the siren by manhandling Gleeson, or Dane Rampy climbing a goalpost. There's something about Essendon playing in Sydney that just
amazing. The following year, I think 94, we lost by a point to them up there as well, and 97, we've lost by a point to them, and I think we might have won. So, yeah, extraordinary circumstances, and it was just good to see Collingwood this last year lose a prelim up there by a point and draw level with us in the preliminary final 1 point loss stakes.
Yeah.
I just wanted to ask, 96 and 97, you were captain. Obviously, you went there sort of in 99 and 2000. I think you finished up in 98. But a lot of the guys that played in that team, you think of your Carousellas, your Blumfields, your Buicks, not Buicks so much as maybe your Moorcrofts and those sorts of guys, were coming through at that stage as opposed to necessarily being sort of senior players. Do you remember captaining that group and remembering what you thought of them, knowing that in a couple of years they would go on and have probably the most dominant season in professional sports in Australian history, like 21-1, 3 straight final wins, a couple prelim finals by 10 plus goals, like that's sort of an extraordinary group. Did you get a feeling when you were captaining those guys what they were capable of?
Yeah, incredible season how it ended up a couple of years later. The best thing the footy club did is probably move on some of their deadwood, and I was one of those. End of 98, probably thought I had another half year, year in front of me, possibly, but I was stonewalled. I was told to retire, and disappointing it came up. It was back page of the Herald Sun the next day after I left the review meeting saying, okay, we'll work out in the next 48 hours how we're going to announce it. Yeah, O'Donnell retires, but yeah, O'Donnell's sacked the next day wasn't impressive on the back page of the Sun. I think there was a few people maybe on the board that were trying to get at Sheeds that released that information, but that's spilt milk now. You never burn your bridges. Love the footy club and it's and what it stands for. And it's just one of those things. I didn't really notice there was some good younger players coming through, but probably, geez, maybe I was just mired in my own career trying to just get over the line and do well enough to stay in the side in 98, my last year. And my last game was the Marshmallow game when North Melbourne beat us and she's got pelted with marshmallows after the game. And there was a lot of synergy in my career. My first game at the end of '87 against Collingwood, I didn't get on till half time. There was no rotations in those days, and I was running up and down the boundary in the first half. Couldn't get on. Paul van der Haar got hurt. I got a run at the start of the third quarter, played on Peter Dacos for the second half, and then in '98, my last year, the elimination final, I didn't get on till half time again, no rotations. And I think that was the sign that Gary, the footy club, thinks you're going to move on and it's time to go. But yeah, look, full credit to the footy club to keep churning the list, to keep finding out new players and finding out who's going to take them to the next premiership. And they did that really quickly in 2000 after possibly being able to do it in '99 after a bad preliminary final loss to Carlton as well.
I think if you'd been there, Gary, in '99, you probably would have been able to tell Dean Wallace to just kick the bloody thing long as opposed to trying to run around Fraser Brown.
Yeah, I'm probably hanging a few tickets on myself right now. I wouldn't have got a game because I wouldn't have deserved it form-wise, but if I had played that last 5 minutes of that game, I reckon I might have been able to get us over the line. Yeah, or even the last quarter. But, yep, it was just another thing in the history of the Carlton and Essendon make-up in finals footy that will go down in folklore.
We'll move on now to sort of your coaching career, because you moved on obviously at the end of '98 and moved into sort of coaching roles. Now, you coached at Essendon and at Brisbane. You coached at Brisbane, I believe, during that sort of 01 to 04 run. We won't hold 01 against Gary. But what was it like coaching under the experienced heads of, say, Lee Matthews and Kevin Sheedy, as opposed to, Matthew Knights and Michael Boss when you were there at Essendon and the Lions?
Well, both Matthews and Sheedy had score on the board when I coached under them. They'd won premiership, or Lee had won one, Sheeds had won 4. Both, different coaches, both think football should be played in a different way to each other, but both really successful, both strong in their thoughts on how the game should be played, both, different people on how they manage players as well, but both wonderful people in the history of the game. To both be able to get 4 premierships in the modern era is, a great effort. And if they had down patches in their coaching careers, they were given time to sort of bounce back because of that. Also, I coached under Voss, Lepich, Matty Knights. They just didn't get the time because footy's an impatient world, and as soon as you're struggling a little bit, you've got a lot of people on the club wanting them to make hard decisions to try and get the club in a motion that's going forwards and upwards. So that was disappointing. I think each one of those young blokes had their strengths as well and their weaknesses, just like Matthews and Sheedy, but maybe they didn't quite get the time in an impatient football world.
So with your own coaching career, did you ever want to step up as a senior role? So obviously you took that game when Sheeds hurt his shoulder tackling Dean Solomon, I believe it was, in 2006, where Eddie Betts with the red time goal obviously cost you the win and left you with the weird position of having to draw. But did you ever get the appetite to step up? Because there was a lot of speculation that you were sort of the heir apparent to Sheeds, even though I think you were pretty adamant in the media at the time that you weren't. But was there ever an opportunity for you to maybe look into the senior role?
There were opportunities over the course of especially the first 12 years of assistant coaching. I did it for 18. So it was 6 Brisbane, 6 Essendon, 6 back at Brisbane. I had the opportunity. I just never saw myself as a senior coach. There's a couple of things that I don't quite do well enough that I think need to be done to be a senior coach. I won't go into them. I just thought I was comfortable and enjoyed my time, and I thought I had an impact as an assistant coach in various roles. Forward defence, mids, head of development at Brisbane at one point, coaching the reserves at Brisbane. So multiple roles, but just didn't see myself as a senior coach. But yeah, I had a few approaches from clubs over the journey to put my hat into the ring. And the furthest I ever got was meeting a headhunter for the West Coast position when they were ended up appointing John Worsfold. Virtually met him at an airport lounge on one of our trips when I was at Brisbane, and it was just, filling him in saying, look, I'm not ready to coach and I don't see myself doing it in the future, come knocking on my door in a few years' time. But that's the most I ever pursued it. But, and I'm quite comfortable with that. I don't hold any regrets or anything like that. I didn't see myself in that sort of role, and it didn't happen, and that's all good.
I quickly just want to switch back to your playing days, because there was just one question I wanted to ask, and you sort of triggered me there a little bit. Did you ever consider leaving Essendon? Was there ever another club come knocking on the door trying to bring you across?
No, it took, so the 1 year in the thirds, 3 years in the reserves, I had only one offer from a bloke. I went to Steve Parsons' sister's 21st, and he was there, and he was the old Richmond bloke. He was actually a young bloke in the 74 Windy Hill Brawl playing for Richmond. He was actually coaching Brunswick in the VFA or VFL, whatever it was then, and said, "Oh, Gary, look, if you ever need a game of footy and you're not happy at Essendon, or if they give you the flick, there's a game here for you at Brunswick." That was the only ever offer I got from any club, both suburban, VFL, AFL, in my time.
Oh, well, we're glad you stayed at Essendon, because obviously you had a storied career there. Just going back to the coaching, it's probably hard to compare because you're not a coach in the current sort of AFL system now. But how have you seen the demand and the role of an assistant coach at AFL level change? It just seems like, all you hear about these assistant coaches, and I believe them when they say that, is that there's just so much to do and they're so overworked for what they get paid and stuff. Do you remember that being your experience when you were an assistant coach, or do you think it sort of changed as the professionalism and the scrutiny on the sports increased over time?
I think in my first 6 years with Lee, it was pretty cruisy, because Matthews was very autocratic. Obviously, we did a lot of stuff. There was only him and three of us, myself, Magic McLean and Matty Armstrong from Fitzroy. We were the coaches, and then we had a couple. We had Craig Starcevich, sort of head of fitness, and a guy called Scott Murphy, who's now the high performance manager at Geelong, from a rugby union background. That was virtually our list of coaches, our resources. So, but yeah, it wasn't, I reckon, when you get back to Essendon, so that next block of 6 years, that's when it picked up. And yeah, in the modern era, the going over a video and then putting presentations together, and it is quite a huge workload in season only. It ebbs and flows. You get a good break in bye weekends at the end of the season and over Christmas. The clubs are pretty mindful of that, but in season it's pretty tough. And look, yes, as you said, I've been out of it for 6 or 7 years with the caps coming back on footy department spends. The assistant coaches have been nipped in the bud, and maybe more work as well with less staff. And I think the biggest thing with coaching these days is to have relationships with the playing group and players, and pretty hard to do that when you've got your head in a computer. So there's a lot of time that has to be spent forming a relationship with players. So she's a lot of hours, and in season she's pretty torrid. But yeah, look, it's a really fulfilling industry as well, and a fulfilling role. If the team has some success, it's really enjoyable. But towards the end of my 18 years, some players started to get on my nerves as well. So it was time, and I got cranky, and it was time for me to move on. Mutually as well, the club thought that as well when I was at Brisbane. But yeah, it was time for me to move. If players are starting to annoy you, or some players.
So if we can just move to sort of more, I suppose, current day Essendon and get your views on the club as it is right now. So obviously, there's that unwanted piece of history we have at the moment, which is the extended streak without a finals win, which we've talked about on this podcast before, and both Grizz and I are of the opinion that at the end of the day, if you're not winning the flag, winning the final is it's nice, but so what? But how do you think, I suppose the club got to this point? Because it's obviously unfolded the way it has. If you could change something about the current setup of the Eston Football Club, you could just go in tomorrow and say, look, this is what we're going to do. This is what we're doing now. This is what we're going to change to do. Is there one thing that you pick that you could change, and how do you see the club moving forward?
I think it's going along okay, but it's never a finished product. So some really good and hard decisions were made over the summer. Maybe not in the right order, or they stumbled over a couple of decisions, but generally the club looks like it's put some really good personnel in key roles, both on and off the field. And we started the coaching. Brad Scott, he's a really professional bloke, a really good fella as well, but he's got a mean streak in him as well. I think, and when I say mean streak, he's not going to go around belting blokes, but and it'll happen, the club will go through its down periods again, over time we go up and down. When the media comes at us, he'll defend us. He'll be quite staunch, and he'll defend his players and he'll defend his club. Whereas I'm not sure the previous 2 or 3 coaches have done that as well when they're under fire. So, but look, everything seems to be, from an outsider's point of view, I don't know a lot about it. I know as much as you guys, but there seems to be a good environment and a good vibe around the football club that allows players to get the best out of themselves. And that's all you have to put in place. I think the proof is in the pudding. We could have won 5 and lost 8, being opposite to what we are now. But I counted them today before I knew I was coming on to today. And probably in the footy team, you've got 12 that you could say that have improved on last year's performance. And then you've got 5 young kids coming through that are only going to improve, I think. So if you're having that many players having career best years, you're on the right path. Yes, there's still a few gaps to plug, and new players will be playing in our next premiership team, I would have thought, because I don't think we'll win this year. But I think we're on the right track. If I could change something about the footy club, it would be the drug saga. It was a nightmare that we are only just recovering from. And the last bloke on our list that was there then, I think, is Dyson, isn't it? Dyson Heppel.
Yep.
It's so good.
Yep.
He's had an ordinary last year. I think his body must have been shot, but it's somehow, and he started a little bit slow this year, but somehow he's found the key to what works for his body, and he's produced some really good footy over the last 4 to 6 weeks. Whether he ends up, if we were to win the premiership this year, because we just improve out of sight in the second half of the year, whether he's still in the team, that's to be questioned, but certainly can't fault him. And I'm loving the way he's going, for example, amongst those other 12 blokes that I mentioned, I thought had improved on their last year's performance.
Do you have a favourite current Essendon player in the team, or a player that you think, oh yeah, he plays like me?
Well, Nick Martin's a beauty. He's from over here, Steve Yako boy. He's come from nowhere. He doesn't fumble, and that's half the battle in footy. If you don't fumble, you're a quicker player than you are. And he's got so much wherewithal and vision too. So he can only improve as well, being a 22-year-old that is, only young, only 1 year into an AFL career. He's got so much upside. So it's wonderful to see him going. Of the young kids, I love Ben Hobbs. He just looks like he's just going to be a real solid, straight up and down player. But just the bloke my favourite player is Sam Draper. And you might see I've got the
Yeah, I've seen the video. I've seen the footage of you and Sammy comparing your hair.
Yeah, I'm channeling him at the moment. I've got the mullet going. Just love just the way he goes about things. So he's just got a lot of energy. He looks like he just loves being there, loves the club, and he's just a really respectful bloke off the field as well. He'll come and if he sees you in the room, he'll come and say hello. He's that sort of bloke, you know. So I imagine he's one of the connectors. He's sort of the gel that brings blokes together. So he's my favourite player at the moment. But, you know, there's a lot to like about some of the young blokes they've introduced. And I'm looking forward to the next month or so, young Zatsis getting a game as well. He's got good raps on him. And just seeing some of the highlights in the couple of twos games he played, he gets the footy. He looks like he picks it up cleanly at ground level and he takes off. He actually bursts out of a stoppage. So that's exciting if he can be one of those players that comes into the side in the second half of the year.
He'll benefit from someone like Parrish coming back, being able to just feed him the ball, and he can be the one that bursts away, because, you know, we probably do lack that player other than, I suppose, Jake Stringer at the moment. And, you know, Jake is 28 years old and can't keep doing it forever as a one-man band in there.
Yeah, I think if we get a lot of blokes coming back in the second half of the year, there'll be some really disappointed blokes playing who's footy, and that's what you need to have. You need to have half a dozen blokes that think, geez, I should be in the team this week. And obviously having to work on the things that might get them in, and it just puts so much pressure on the blokes that are in the side. You get so much of better performance from the team when you've got that sort of pressure, and it's looking that way. So, you know, guys like Durham that have grabbed the spot, Peter Wright coming back, you know, Laverde's back after injury. You get Parrish and Shield coming back, you know, even Jake Kelly, who can play a certain role on certain blokes in the back half. But one guy I've got to mention too, Zach Merritt, over his journey, he's been a wonderful player, but he's been lots of our supporters and me at times with the way he went about things. But he has been exemplary this year in where he needed to improve, and he's been a real leadership beacon for some of the other players that still need to improve in the areas that he has. So I really want to give him a rap for his season in regard to, you know, what we've seen in the past.
I just want to go back to what you were saying about Nick Martin, though, because I think Nick Martin is probably the ultimate example of a player who would have benefited from a full twos comp like yourself, because obviously there was something about him at the draft level that he just wasn't ready. He trained with West Coast. I think he even had a couple of sessions with Fremantle in a couple of pre-seasons, and they never looked like picking him up. And then, you know, he came across to us and had that really good pre-season. We took him as a supplementary. So it is sort of blokes like him, I think, that would really benefit from it, because they're not ready at 18, but 4 years later, and he's turning himself into being a really handy player at AFL level. Yeah,
I'll back that up. He just probably needed time. How they missed him when he was under their nose for a fair period is just, well, it's our gain, isn't it? So really exciting player. You know, some of the other guys that can benefit from playing a bit of a twos footy in a stronger comp will be blokes that have had a lot of injuries as well as young kids. So Cox, Zach Reed, Harrison Jones, those guys who I think are all going to be good players. They've shown enough in their small glimpses of footy, especially Cox. On Anzac Day, I think it was a couple of years ago, he could have been anything and will be anything. He just needs to get his body right. And they are blokes that will come into the team in the next, the second half of the year and the next 18 months that are really going to hopefully, really springboard the team into being one of the better teams in the comp.
When you talk about, you mentioned how we've got blokes come back from injuries, just casting that net a bit wider. Over your time, is there one player that you're disappointed we never saw the best of? So, I mean, as an Essendon fan, I think if we're going way back before you started, obviously, but Neil Danaher is the key example. He could have been the best of the lot from what everyone says, and then unfortunately got injured, never came back. In modern times, I thought Scott Gumbleton was going to be a star key position player. I still remember watching his debut, and he just had those sticky hands and a great set shot technique. And then obviously his body just never let him play, really. So is there any player that you think of and go, they were robbed of a really good AFL career?
Those two, yeah, Neilo and Scott Gumbleton. I was there when he got drafted. It was so sad because he was a pick two, and you really want your pick two to come through and be a really solid player for you. He's almost shaped like a pear. He just had an odd shape, and he had terrible, back-related hamstring stuff. So yeah, it would have been great to see him, have an unencumbered injury career. The other one, I reckon, I played with Dean Wallace, who played in 2 premierships. He missed so many games through injury and suspension as well, I might add. But he just didn't get a run at it. He had played his first game. Sorry, my first game was his 10th game. He was, what was he? He was 4 years younger than me. So my first game, his 10th game. By the time I retired, I was 243. He was 87 or something game. So I think if he had have had just a free run, play every game, that's where you get your development, consecutive footy and consecutive seasons of doing it. I think he could have been, something, 12 player he was as a player for the footy club. I would like to see it all over again for Dino, although sometimes he didn't help himself in his preparation to get through, but that's that's here nor there. Some blokes just have the bad luck, some have the good luck.
I feel sort of bad about bringing up the Fraser Brown tackle now. You've mentioned him as a bloke that was
he had plenty of good finals moments when he ran through a couple of blokes in the grand finals, both of them that allowed us to walk tall and win those games.
I think Milhan is still picking himself up.
Amazingly that day, and that's the difference in the competition now with concussion rules. Mill come on about 20 minutes later.
Yeah.
So,
What's different?
How good he was, but that was the times, wasn't it?
So just, I think, to start wrapping up, just to returning to modern day, when you look at the group as it is now with the coaching group and, with the Parishes, your Shields, your Setterfields, maybe a Cox, a Reid, probably not Reid, but maybe a Cox or another player to come in later in the year. What do you think is a real, obviously you have your ceiling and your floor. The ceiling is, pie in the sky, winning a premiership, which probably isn't likely. But what do you think is the likely outcome for this year? What's a pass mark from here? Noting that, Bonds and I both at the start of the season thought 8 wins was a good total for the entire season. We're at that now. We're 8-5. What's a pass mark from here, do you think, for us?
Yeah, I think people are saying we've got the easiest run on the way home, but I think that was from round 10 when we had to play North and West Coast. Now I think it's comparable draw or fixture to most of the other sides. You have a look at the fixture. We come up against teams. Okay, we've got a few home games, the 2 Adelaides in Melbourne, but we have to go to Geelong. We play Collingwood last. Freo this week even. But I think, and the coaching staff, the club will have the message, okay, it's a year where we're just getting back on our feet and we're just trying to do the best we can, and we just want the development of as many players as we can and the team heading in the right direction. But if the team doesn't make the finals this year, it's probably a failure from the bye. And that's how razor sharp footy is. I think for us to get the benefit of this year, it'd be great to be able to play another final. And that's where your players get experience. A final's probably worth 10 games, and you want as many as your players. And if you can have 4 or 5 young blokes in that finals team, if you're lucky enough to make the finals and play in that, and they pinch one, it's just so much good experience for the following few years, rather than finish 9th, and go to pre-season early or go to your off-season holidays early. I think. We're 8-5. Even though it wasn't, and I'd probably agree with you, 8 wins probably would have been good at the start of the year. I think it'll be a failure if we don't make the finals now. It won't be the end of the world. I sound like Brian Cook now of Carlton. It won't be the end of the world if we don't make it, but it will be a disappointment after the year we've had so far. Just that it'll be a chance to give some finals pointy end experience to our players.
I think that's a good spot for us to wrap this one up, Gary. It's going to be interesting because I know there's definitely a few listeners who will be listening to this who will be listening to what you've just said about finals, and they're staunchly against the idea of finals because they're worried that the club may get ahead of itself a little bit again if they were to reach finals and to chase a quick fix like potentially we've done previously. But I just want to say thank you for coming on. It's been great chatting to you. You are obviously, despite your attempts to stay modest at the start of the podcast, you are an Essendon legend, whether or not you want to take that mantle. And you definitely did a lot for the football club, and certainly growing up gave me a lot of pleasure. In the 90s, there it was great to watch you play and watch the Essendon Football Club do its thing during that era. So, thank you for that, and thank you for coming on this evening.
Thanks for the invite, gentlemen, and hopefully we can enjoy some good times for the rest of 2023 as really interested and supportive Essendon supporters.